He buried his wife on a Tuesday, and something in him went quiet that never woke up again. For 3 years the men on that ranch watched a good man turn to stone. No laughter, no softness, nothing but work and dust, and the click of a gun when a horse went lame. They said his heart had closed like a fist and stayed that way. They said no woman living would ever pry it open. They were wrong. It took a stranger with a bullet in her side, a name no one on that ranch could pronounce, and one single evening by a dying fire, an evening that started with a lie and ended with something no one saw coming. This is the story of the cowboy who swore he'd never feel again, and the woman who made a liar out of him. Stay with me. Because the ending is going to sit in your chest for a long time. The night Cole Ferris took the stranger in, I dropped a nail in the jar before I even knew why. That's a habit of mine, and I'll not apologize for it. Every man's got something. Some men chew, some men pray, some men drink themselves stupid on a Saturday and swear off it Sunday morning like it's the first time they've made the promise. Me, I keep a mason jar on the shelf above the cook stove, and it's full of horseshoe nails, bent ones, mostly, the ones the smith throws out. Every time I get to worrying about somebody on this ranch, I drop one in. I've been doing it since before my hair went the color of ash. Some nights the jar rattles like a rattlesnake's tail when I set it down, and I know without counting that I've had a bad month. That night I heard the dogs go off first. Then hooves, slow, wrong, one horse walking like it didn't trust the ground. And then Cole's voice, low, saying a word I didn't catch, and another man's voice, young Tomás, one of our vaqueros, arguing with him in that scared quick way a boy talks when he's seen something he can't unsee. I went to the door in my sock feet with a lamp, and that's when I dropped the nail. She was across the saddle in front of Cole like a sack of grain, except grain doesn't bleed, and grain doesn't have a hand fisted so tight in the horse's mane that Cole had to work her fingers loose one at a time. Her buckskin dress was black wet down one side. Her hair had come out of its wrapping and hung across her face, and her eyes, I'll never forget this, her eyes were open, and they were watching all of us, one after another, like she was deciding which of us would be the one to finish her off. An Apache woman, on the Bar F in the year of our Lord 1884, with the whole territory still holding its breath over Geronimo up in the Sierra Madre, and every white man from Tucson to the Gila swearing he'd shoot on sight. Amos? Cole didn't look at me. He never looked at anybody when he'd made up his mind. Clear the long table, boil water, and get Tomás to shut those dogs up before somebody down the road hears them. I stood there like a fool. Amos still quiet. That was the thing about Cole, the quieter he got, the more he meant it. Now, I'll tell you about Cole Ferris the way I knew him then, before any of this, so you understand what kind of thing was happening in my kitchen that night. Cole was 34 years old and looked 10 more. He'd built the Bar F up from a lined shack and 40 head of scrub cattle into the second biggest spread in the valley, and he'd done it with his hands and his back and a stubbornness that God himself couldn't have argued out of him. Men respected him. Some feared him. Nobody, in the 3 years I'd cooked for that ranch, had seen him laugh. There'd been a wife once. I never met her, I came on after. But the older hands talked about her the way you talk about a good year of rain, like something that came once and might never come again. Marguerite. Meg, they called her. Cole met her back in Texas and married her inside of a month, and by every account he'd been a different man then, one who sang under his breath while he shoed horses, one who'd carry a woman's basket of wash so she wouldn't strain her back because she was carrying his child. She drowned. That's the short of it, and the short of it is all Cole ever gave anybody. There was a river crossing in the spring flood, and a wagon, and the water came up faster than a wall, and when it was over there was a wagon on its side and a widower on the bank and no Meg. No Meg, and no child either, because she'd been 7 months along. He came out west after that. Built the Bar F, put every hour of daylight into it, and a good many hours of dark besides, and somewhere in all that building he laid the last brick over his own heart and mortared it shut. I'd watched him put down a horse without blinking, watched him fire a man for cruelty to a mule and never raise his voice doing it, watched him sit at Christmas with a plate in front of him and eat like it was any other Tuesday. The man wasn't cold the way a mean man is cold. He was cold the way a stove is cold in July. You got the feeling there'd been a fire in there once, roaring, and it had simply gone out, and nobody had the heart or the kindling to start it again. So you understand my confusion, standing in my own kitchen, watching that same stone-hearted man ease a bleeding Apache woman down onto my long table like she was made of eggshell. Where I started. Dry wash, north fence. He was already cutting the buckskin away from the wound with the little knife he kept for gutting fish. Coyote dogging some steers up there and found her. She'd crawled maybe half a mile with that in her. He tipped his head at the wound. Somebody shot her and left her to do the rest herself. Somebody, I said it flat. He didn't answer. But we both knew somebody had a name, and the name was probably Del Halloran, whose ranch backed onto ours to the north, and who'd lost a dozen head that spring and blamed Apache for every last one, though I'd have bet my jar of nails it was mountain lions and his own careless riding. The woman made a sound when Cole touched the wound. Not a scream. A short, bitten-off grunt, the kind you make when you're trying with everything you have not to make any sound at all, and her hand shot out and gripped Cole's wrist. He froze. For a second the two of them just stayed like that, her fingers dark against his sunburned wrist, her black eyes on his gray ones. And I swear to you, old fool that I am, I saw something move across Cole's face. Just a flicker. Like a curtain shifting in a window of a house you thought was empty. Then it was gone and he was Cole again. "Hold still," he said, though she couldn't have understood the words. "You're going to want to hit me. Go ahead." She didn't hit him. She let go of his wrist, slow, one finger at a time, and she laid her arm back down at her side, and she looked up at the ceiling of my kitchen, and she went somewhere inside herself where the pain couldn't follow. I've seen strong men try to do that and fail. She did it like breathing. The bullet had gone in below the ribs and come out clean, which was the only mercy in the whole business. Cole packed it and I threaded the needle because my hands are steadier than his for close work, and between us we stitched her front and back while she lay there and did not scream, did not weep, did not do one single thing to make it easier on herself except go still. Tamaz held the lamp and looked green. Twice I thought the boy would faint. Twice Cole said, without heat, "Steady, son," and the boy steadied. When it was done, and she was bandaged, and I'd got some willow bark tea down her a spoonful at a time, Cole stood back from the table and looked at what we'd done like a man surfacing from deep water. "She can't stay," Tamaz said. He said it the way you say a thing you know is true and hate. "Senor, if Halloran finds out if the soldiers—" "I know what happens." Cole wiped his hands on a rag. "Go to bed, Tamaz. You did fine tonight. You didn't see anything. None of us did." The boy looked between us. Then he nodded, and he went, and it was just me and Cole and the woman on the table and the fire and the smell of blood and willow bark and lamp oil. Cole sat down heavy in the chair by the stove. He looked older than I'd ever seen him. He looked, for the first time in the 3 years I'd known him, like a man and not a monument. "She'll die if she goes back out there," he said. "Not to me, to the fire maybe, to himself. She'll die if she stays, if the wrong man rides in. Either way I've got a dead woman on my land. I just have to pick which way." He rubbed his face with both hands. "God, I'm tired, Amos." I dropped another nail in the jar. It clinked against the first one. "Why'd you bring her in, Cole?" I asked him, because I wanted to know. Because in 3 years I'd never once seen him step off the straight hard road he'd built for himself, and here he'd swerved into the ditch for a stranger who couldn't even thank him. "You could have ridden past. Nobody would have known. Nobody would have faulted you." He was quiet a long time. "When I found her," he said finally, "she wasn't crawling toward water. There's a stock tank not 200 yards from where she went down. She was crawling the other way, away from it. He looked at me. She'd rather have died dry and alone in a wash than crawl toward anything that smelled like us. That's how much she wanted nothing to do with our kind. And I don't know, his jaw worked. I looked at her doing that and something in me he stopped. He didn't have the word. Cole Ferris, who had a word for everything, who could tell a man exactly why he was wrong in 6 flat syllables, didn't have the word for what had happened to him in that dry wash. I couldn't ride past, that's all. I couldn't do it. On the table, the woman turned her head. Her eyes found Cole across the room, and in a voice cracked and low, in careful, deliberate English none of us had known she had, she said 4 words that shut my mouth and Cole's both. "You should have," she said, "left me." The fire popped, and Cole Ferris looked at that woman like a door he'd nailed shut 3 years ago had just, very quietly, come off one of its hinges. She told us her name on the 4th day, and it took Cole a week to say it right. Dawn, that's as close as our clumsy mouths could get. She'd say it slow for us, a soft sound at the front, a catch in the middle like a held breath, and Cole would try and get it wrong and she'd shake her head, not unkind, just certain, and say it again. He kept trying. That was the first strange thing. The Cole I knew didn't try twice at anything. He did it right the first time or decided it wasn't worth doing. But he sat by her cot in the tack room we'd cleared out for her, and he said her name wrong 100 times until he said it right. And when he finally said it right, she didn't smile. She wasn't a smiler, Dawn, but something eased in her face, and Cole saw it. And he didn't say her name wrong again after that. She healed slow. A gut-side wound does. There was a fever on the 6th day that had me dropping nails 2 and 3 at a time, and Cole didn't sleep through the worst of it. I found him in the morning sitting against the tack room wall, eyes bloodshot. A bowl of cold broth gone untouched beside him because she'd finally slept and he hadn't wanted to wake her to feed her. I want to be honest about what this was and what it wasn't in those first weeks. It wasn't sweetness. Nobody was courting anybody. Half the time they didn't speak at all, she because she chose not to, him because he'd forgotten how. They were 2 people who'd each buried the middle of themselves and gone on living around the whole. What they had, at the start, was recognition. The way one cripple knows another by the walk. Because here is the thing I learned about Dawn, in pieces over those weeks, the way you learn anything true, sideways and slow, and never all at once. She had been at San Carlos, the reservation. She said the word the way Cole said river, flat and final, a place where the worst thing had happened. She'd had a husband. She'd had a boy 4 years old. On the forced march down out of the mountains in the heat, with too little water and too much cavalry, the boy had sickened, and then the husband had been shot. She never said the circumstance, and I never asked, and Dawn had run. Not toward anything. Away. Away from the place her people were being driven. Away from the soldiers. Away from the whole grinding machine of it. Out into a country where every hand was against her. Because staying meant watching the last of her world die by inches, and running meant at least dying on her own feet. She'd been running, in one form or another, for the better part of a year when Del Halloran's bullet found her. Do you see it now? Do you see what Cole saw in that dry wash, crawling away from the water? He'd run too. She'd run from soldiers and a grave. He'd run from a river and a grave. She'd built her running into a hard shell of solitude. He'd built his into a ranch. Different shapes, same wound. And I think this is true, though Cole never said it and Dawn never said it. I think each of them looked at the other and saw, for the first time in years, somebody who wouldn't need it explained. Now the evening. You've been patient, and here it is, and I'll tell it as near to how it happened as an old man's memory allows. It was near the end of her 2nd month. She was up and walking by then, walking the fence line at dusk when the hands were in, keeping to the shadows out of a caution none of us had to teach her. Cole had taken to walking with her. Nothing was said about it. He'd just fall in beside her, and they'd go the north fence together and come back after dark, and neither of them ever told the other a thing about where they'd been in life, or so I thought. This particular evening there was a storm to the west that never came, the kind that lights up the whole sky purple and rolls its thunder at you from 30 miles off and then dies before it reaches you, teasing. I'd built a fire in the yard pit because the night had a bite to it, and I was tending my beans, and Cole and Don came in off the fence and sat down at the fire, on opposite sides of it, the way they did. And Don started to sing. I don't know what moved her to it, maybe the stormlight, maybe the smell of rain that wasn't going to come. It was low, and it was in her own tongue, and it wasn't a happy song. You don't need the words to know a grieving song when you hear one. It went up and it came down, and it circled back on itself like a thing looking for something it had lost, and it filled up that whole dark yard, and my beans burned and I didn't care. I watched Cole. He'd gone very still, firelight on one side of his face, and as she sang, that face, that stone face, began to do something I hadn't seen it do in 3 years. It began to come apart, not weeping, nothing so simple. It was the slow, terrible loosening of a thing that has been held clenched so long it's forgotten it was ever anything else. His jaw, then around his eyes. Then his shoulders, which had been up around his ears since before I'd known him, coming down, like a load set gently on the ground. She finished the song. The last note hung in the air and let go. And Cole Ferris, I heard him do it across the fire. Cole made a sound. Just one. A short, broken, terrible sound, the sound of a man crying who has forgotten how, so that it comes out wrong, comes out like something tearing. He put his hand over his mouth, ashamed, I think, trying to shove it back down. Don didn't look away, the way you or I would have, to give a man his privacy. She looked straight at him across the fire, and she said, in that careful English she saved for the things that mattered, you lost one too. It wasn't a question. Cole took his hand from his mouth. His eyes were wet and shining in the firelight, and he didn't hide it. And that, more than anything in those 2 months, was how I knew something in him had come open, because the Cole I knew would have walked off into the dark rather than let another soul see his face wet. My wife, he said, his voice was wrecked, and the baby she was carrying 3 years, he swallowed. I never say it out loud, I've never said it out loud to anybody. I know, Don said, I can tell. The ones who never say it, you can see it on them. It sits here. She touched her own chest over the healing wound as if the two hurts lived in the same place. It rots there if you never let the air at it. Does it stop? Cole asked her, and oh, the way he asked it, like a child. Like a man who'd been carrying a question for 3 years and had finally found someone who might know. Does it ever stop hurting? Don looked into the fire a long moment. No, she said, and I flinched because I'd wanted her to lie to him to give him the kind thing. But she wasn't a liar, Don, not even a merciful one. No, it does not stop, but it changes. It goes from a thing that is killing you to a thing you carry. That is all the mercy there is. It becomes something you carry instead of something that carries you. She looked up at him. You have been carried a long way by yours. Cole looked at her across that fire like she'd reached into his chest, and named a bone he didn't know how to name. Nobody said anything for a while. The storm to the west muttered and gave up. My beans were ruined, and I sat there in the dark at the edge of the firelight, and I understood that I was watching something I had no business watching. The moment a shut-up man opened a window, just a crack, just enough to feel the air, for the first time in 3 years. I got up quiet and went inside and left them to it. And before I slept I took the jar down off the shelf and I didn't add a nail. I took one out, just one, set it on the windowsill, first time I'd ever done that. But I want you to understand that this is not a story where love comes and all the darkness lifts and the fiddles play. This is the real thing, and the real thing has teeth. Because 11 days after the fire, Del Halloran rode into the Bar F yard with 2 men and a rifle across his saddle, and he sat his horse in front of Cole Ferris, and he said, "Cole, word is you're keeping a squaw up here. Word is you got yourself a live Apache on this ranch." And I stood in the kitchen doorway with the jar in my 2 hands, and I did not put in a nail, and I did not take one out, because my hands had gone too cold to move. I'll tell you exactly what Cole did, because I was 10 feet from it, and I've thought about it every day since. He didn't reach for a gun, he didn't puff up. He walked out into the middle of that yard, easy, wiping his hands on a rag like Halloran had caught him at nothing more than mending harness, and he stood there in the sun, and he lied to Del Halloran's face with a steadiness I'd have sworn no honest man could manage. "Somebody's been telling you stories, Del. My man Ruiz says he saw a woman on your north fence at dusk, dark, long hair, buckskin. Your man Ruiz saw Tomaz's sister, who came up from Nogales to nurse the boy through a fever, and who has since gone home." Cole said it plain and bored like the truth. "You want to ride my whole spread looking for a woman who isn't here, Del, you go ahead. But you'll do it knowing I'll remember you called me a liar in my own yard over a thing your half-blind vaquero thought he saw in the dark. It was a good lie. It was a brave lie. Halloran was a bully, but he wasn't a fool, and he could hear the cost a man like Cole was willing to pay to defend it, and he did the arithmetic bullies do and decided it wasn't worth the blood. He spat. He said some ugly things about a man who'd taken Apache's side over his neighbors, hypothetical or not. And he rode off north, and the 2 men rode with him, and the dust hung in the yard a long time after. And here is the morally heavy part, the part I turn over at night. That lie was not free. Cole knew standing in that yard that Halloran would not let it go. Men like that don't. He'd go home and he'd stew and he'd talk to the wrong people in town, and sooner or later, a week, a month, somebody official would ride up the Bar F road, a cavalry patrol or a marshal or the agent's men, and they would not be satisfied with a story about Tomaz's sister. And when they found her, they would take her back to San Carlos or worse, and they would ruin Cole for hiding her, take his ranch, maybe his neck. So Cole had a choice. Send her away now, tonight, before it came down, cut her loose to run and die alone in the country the way he'd found her, and save himself and the Bar F and everything he'd built over the bones of his grief. Or keep her and lose all of it, certain as sunrise, and maybe get her killed anyway in the losing. He told her that night. I heard part of it sitting on the porch pretending to mend a bridle. He laid it all out for her, flat and honest, the way she'd have wanted, no softening. And when he was done there was a long silence, and then Don said something I didn't catch, and Cole said, rough, No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying I don't know how to do the right thing here, because both roads have your blood on them, and I have already stood on a riverbank once and watched the person And he stopped, and he didn't finish it, and neither of them said anything for a while. What broke it in the end wasn't Cole and it wasn't Halloran. It was word from the south. Tomaz brought it up from town, carried it careful because he knew what it meant. There were Chiricahua being moved again, a remnant band, brought down out of the Sierra Madre under a flag of truce, being marched east under guard to the railhead, bound for Florida for a fort 2,000 miles from any mountain they'd ever seen. And among them, Tomaz had heard from a Mexican teamster who'd seen the column, was a name. A woman's name, an old woman, that Don had spoken once by the fire when she thought no one but Cole was listening. Her mother, alive, in that column, marching east to a swamp to die away from the skies she'd been born under, but alive now, tonight, 40 miles south and moving farther every day. I have never seen a human face do what Don's face did when Tomaz told her. It was joy and it was grief and it was terror all at once, all fighting and none of them winning. Her mother was alive. Her mother was being taken to the far end of the earth. And there was a window, a few days, no more, in which a person on a fast horse, a person who knew the country and knew the Apache way of moving unseen, might catch that column, might slip into it, might be there, might hold her mother's hand on the long road to the swamp, so that the old woman would not die alone among strangers. To go was almost certainly to be caught. To be caught was San Carlos or Florida or a bullet. To stay was the bar F was coal, was the fire that had, God help them both, only just come back to life. She came to coal at dusk. I was there. She wanted me there, I think, because she decided I was a witness and old men make good witnesses. And she told him she was going. Cole didn't argue. That's the thing I want you to know about how far that man had come. The old Cole would have argued or gone cold or turned to stone and walked away. This Cole, the one with the window open in his chest, he heard her out, and his face broke, and he did not once try to talk her out of doing the thing that was going to take her away from him, because he had learned from her at that fire the difference between loving a person and needing them to stay. I know, he said. I know you have to go. I do not want to go, Dawn said, and it was the closest she ever came in all those months to letting me see the whole of her heart. That is the cruel thing. A year ago I wanted nothing. I crawled away from water because I wanted to be done. And now, when there is finally something I do not want to leave, she stopped. She pressed her hand flat against Cole's chest over the place where the fire had come back. Now I have somewhere to go and someone to leave. You did this to me. You made me have something to lose again. It wasn't an accusation. It might have been the tenderest thing anyone ever said to that man. That is the gift, and it is the knife. Cole put his hand over her hand on his chest. Take the gray, he said. His voice was steady, and it cost him everything to keep it steady. She's the fastest thing on this ranch, and she'll go all night and not founder. Take the good rifle and the Mexican saddle, it's lighter. Take whatever food Amos can put up in an hour. He looked at me. I was already moving. And Dawn. She waited. He had 100 things to say. I could see them all backed up behind his teeth, 3 years of not saying crowding up behind this one door that had finally come open. Take me with you. Stay. Come back. I love you. I can't do the stone again. I don't know how to go back to being stone. He said none of it. He looked at her, and whatever was in his face said it all without a single word. And Dawn looked back at him and let it be said that way. Because some things a man like Cole can only say with his face, and she'd always known how to read him better than any of us. She rode out before the moon was full up. I stood in the yard with Cole, and we watched the gray carry her north to the road and then south toward that column and her mother, and whatever end was waiting on that road. She didn't look back. Dawn wasn't a looker back. She told me once that looking back is how you lose your footing on hard ground. The dust of her going hung silver in the last light and then settled, and the yard was quiet, and it was just Cole and me and the dark coming down. I thought he'd go to stone again. I truly did. I stood there braced for it, ready to watch that window in his chest swing shut and get nailed over, ready to spend the next years cooking for a monument again. He didn't. He stood a long while looking down the empty road. Then he let out a breath, a long one it seemed he'd been holding since a riverbank in Texas 3 years and a lifetime ago, and he said, not to me exactly, she was right. It doesn't stop. You just carry it. And then he said the thing I've never forgotten, the thing that told me the fire was going to stay lit this time, whatever came. But I'd rather carry 2, he said, than carry nothing. I forgot that. God, Amos, for 3 years I forgot that a full heart's supposed to be heavy. He went inside. I heard him later, doing a thing I hadn't heard him do since before the bar F had a name. I heard Cole Ferris, alone in the dark of his own house, humming. I don't know if she caught the column. I don't know if she found her mother, or if she's east in that Florida swamp now, or dead on the road, or free in the Sierra Madre where the last of them ran. Word doesn't travel back up a road like that. Cole never heard, and Cole never stopped listening. I know because every time a rider came up the Bar F road for the next 2 years, I'd see him lift his head quick before he could stop himself, and then set it back down. But I'll tell you what I know, and it's this. There's a mason jar on my shelf, and the night she rode out I took a nail from it and set it on the windowsill next to the first one. 2 nails on the sill now. 2 people I'd stopped worrying about, not because the worry was over, but because worries for the closed-up ones, the stone ones, and neither of them was that anymore. The last I saw of Cole that night, he'd carried a chair out to the yard pit, and he'd built up the fire, and he was just sitting there in the firelight, alone, humming that low song of hers that he couldn't possibly have known all the words to. But he knew the tune. He'd learned the tune by heart, across a fire. On the one evening a stone man let a stranger's grieving song reach all the way in, and light something he'd sworn to God was out for good. And a fire like that,